Thank you for joining the Doctor Whisperer. I am your host, Sharon Feckety, and I am happy to bring you a show where we talk about the business of medicine. I hope that you enjoy it. Please feel free to share, subscribe, and pass it on. Enjoy the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm so happy to bring you today Dr. Stacey Francis. She's been treating patients using chiropractic, kinesiology, nutrition, and functional. Here I am thinking how proud of myself I am that I said kinesiology right for the first time in 10 years, and I can't say functional medicine anymore. Anywho, in the Metro Detroit area. So I'm very happy to have you here and to learn more about you and your practice in beautiful Bloomfield Hills, Michigan.
It is beautiful. It's a beautiful day. Thank you for having me, Sharon.
Thank you so much. So because this show is the business of medicine, I always am very interested in the story behind the business. Wow. So can you share a little insight about you and why you decided to open this beautiful practice of your own?
Yes, reluctantly. So I graduated from chiropractic school, and I was really sick when I graduated. I had made myself very sick with a lot of stress, and it took a long time for me to figure things out. And so that will come later in our story. Mm-hmm. But when I graduated, I was fortunate enough to have my cousin working as a chiropractor, and he actually invited me into his practice, and I worked there for 7 years. And I was very happy for those 7 years, but I wasn't the person he really wanted me to be. He wanted someone who was going to grab onto everything he said. And although it was brilliant, I had so many insecurities on my own that I was just surviving. And it wasn't until I had babies and it was time for me to fly the coop, because I wanted babies to be with me. So between patients, I could nurse. And that wasn't his plan for his clinic. And so I actually left the clinic at that point. But what was beautiful is that I learned so many things, and I learned how to be confident. And then I appreciated him so much more for what he was trying to teach me that I just wasn't able to learn at the time, because I just had so many insecurities. But when you go out on your own, you figure things out.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what happened. So you decided not to go and join somebody else. You decided to go out on your own after that experience.
You know what? It didn't even occur to me to go out with someone else.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It just, it was like I already had a small following. Mm-hmm. And so I just decided, and it was very interesting because when I hung that shingle, and I remember our first day sitting there waiting for patients to call. Hello. We had 0, and we were just sitting there waiting for people to call. And I remember the first client that we had, she came in and she was thrilled and we were happy. And I will never forget her for being my first patient, my own first office.
I love it. Yeah, I'll never forget my first physician client for as long as I live. So I really understand that. It's funny, that movie Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. Not always the case.
It's not that easy.
Not that easy. So tell us now just a little bit, because I love the story. I always like to know what it was like in the beginning, and maybe some of the things that you learned and where you're at today.
Yeah. So right before I graduated chiropractic school, I was at the heaviest weight I had been. To find a dress for graduation was brutally painful. And I managed to find something. I actually liked the material. I didn't like how it looked on me, but I liked the material. Okay. And so I bought it and I wore it. And I have pictures of a very, very large Stacey Francis up on that stage, grabbing that diploma. And from that point on, I sought out all my colleagues that could help me. And I learned things. I learned lab testing that I hadn't learned before. Not the traditional lab testing that everyone gets, but digging deeper. What else was available that's just not covered by insurance? Because it just isn't. They don't want to spend money on something, and the pharmaceutical companies and the doctors, they don't want to spend money on labs that don't have a drug associated with it. If you're just looking for deficiencies and imbalances, that's not available through insurance. So I had to seek out more help. I had to look harder. I looked into, I found out about thyroid and blood sugar and anemias and autoimmune and all the things. And it took me when I was driving and I was just so exhausted. And there was a woman and a child crossing my path as I was stopped at a light. And my eyes were closing because I was just so tired. And I put my foot harder on the brake to make sure I was actually braking. And I thought, this is so dangerous. This is a really dangerous place for me. And so I figured things out, and I have my own stuff that I deal with health-wise, but I've gotten a handle out of it since then. There's, autoimmune and all the things. But now I figured out how to support myself. So I have more energy than I've ever had before, hence the book and the practice and all the things, right? And this podcast. So it lets me live life fully.
Yeah. I work mostly with integrative medicine doctors, and one of the things that recently when I was speaking to an MD in my own personal experience, I had mentioned that I didn't want to mention, I usually, when I go for a personal visit, for my own health, I usually don't want to ever mention that I work with doctors, because I'm really there not to have my brain picked, right? Because that's usually what happens, right? It's probably one of the reasons you don't run around telling everybody you're a doctor, because then they're going to ask you for health advice everywhere you go. So I said, because I was disappointed in the way things were going, I said, I work with integrative medicine doctors. And he sat back and had this very big reaction, which I called him out on and said, oh, you seem to be having a reaction to that. And he said, oh, no. I said, no, I can actually see it. I said, what is that about? And he said, oh, well, there's all these alternatives out there, and just going down the road. So just before we continue on with this conversation, I was very lucky in the sense that I started my own career in Eastern and Western medicine. So I've already heard all of the MDs talk bad about the DOs, and the DOs talk bad about the MDs, and the acupuncturists talk bad about the chiropractors, and the chiropractors talk, it's all this very strange world where I would love, that's why I like to call it out, because I really do think the only way to normalize anything is to speak about it. Right. Because collaboration and investigation about your own health is just so important. And as you were alluding to before, insurance companies pay for sick care, not for preventative care. So it takes brave souls like yourself, Dr. Stacey Francis, to have, luckily, maybe unluckily for you at the time, that you were having this negative experience in your life, but that you could bring that into your business, into your practice, and help so many more people.
Absolutely. So I listened to that podcast of yours where you spoke about your experience, which was phenomenal and heart-wrenching at the same time, by the way.
Thank you.
And I want you to know that that is the patient that walks in my door, are the patients that have gone, they're exhausted, and they go to their doctor and they say, I'm exhausted. And what does the doctor do? The doctor says, okay, let's run some labs. And they run the labs there. You are so perfectly fine. Enjoy your life.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay. And they go home and they're so exhausted, and they come back and they're a squeaky wheel until the point where the doctor is like, would you like an antidepressant with that?
Yeah.
And that's the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not the answer. And then they come see me and we actually do lab work. We do a thyroid panel that includes more than just TSH and T4. The thyroid panel is very long. If you think you have thyroid symptoms, hypothyroid symptoms, let's look deeper. Do not settle for just TSH and T4.
Yeah.
And we're looking for things that are not, you might not fit their range. Their range is so wide that if you are on the outskirts of it, and feeling ill, you are probably not where you need to be within that range.
Yeah.
And so it is about you personally, you specifically. You are not everyone else. And so that's what we do. We try to figure it out. And so I heard your podcast and I'm like, yes, that's exactly what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm, I feel blessed because I realized that while I was in this appointment, I felt really, really bad for the people that don't stand up for themselves and speak up for themselves and then find somebody else that, because so this podcast that we're referring to is just this last one. You should just look it up. It's my personal experience with a doctor. I had gone to an integrative medicine doctor first and paid cash and still having this disappointment. So not to go down that whole rabbit hole again, but I can't stress enough. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation that you don't have to just take what a physician says to you as gold, because we all know our bodies, especially women, right? I mean, I'm 49 years old. I'm going to be 50 in October. I work out. I eat well. The only thing on my blood work that came back was that I have high cholesterol, but I know
everyone has high cholesterol.
Right. So, they called me to tell me that and told me that they would have to, if it didn't clear up in 6 months, that they would have to put a statin. Right. So I know better because I'm so blessed to work with physicians that think outside the box. So anyway, I am going back to my physician who happens to be a shaman too. So to all of you, it's really how I feel. Because, and it is unfortunate though, because a lot of people will just take the advice and it will feel wrong. And I think that's probably what I wanted to stress the most, is that when we we can actually feel the energy of somebody else.
Right.
And I'm sure you pick up on that and that you encourage your patients to
do
that, right?
You.
Are you still running your medical practice like it's 1990? Well, what about Riva Global Medical Virtual Assistants? A medical virtual assistant, I promise you, is the way to run your medical practice today. Why? Because you can save, thousands of dollars. No more paying for health insurance, no more worrying about office space. You also have trained professionals. These wonderful human beings get trained, and they have a client service manager that makes sure that your VA that you're working with for your practice is hitting all the goals that you need to make sure that your practice is run efficiently and friendly. Check out Riva Global Medical Virtual Assistants today.
We interrupt this awesome podcast to share with you about our sponsor, TIE Technology. TIE Technology was founded with the thought that every customer deserves exceptional customer services. So if you know of any company that has a phone system where the auto attendant doesn't really sound good, you press 1 and you think you're going to go to a live person, but you end up with a broken recording, it's probably time that you call TIE Technology. And if you mention this podcast, you will get the first 3 months for free. So make sure you mention the Dr. Whisperer podcast show. Check them out.
So as you were speaking, I was remembering my progression. I've been in practice for 30 years. I am not the doctor I started out to be.
Right. You've evolved.
I've evolved. I've learned. I listen, right? I didn't know to listen before. I was dying to know how old your doctor was. Like, were they right out of school? Were they
He was in his 40s.
Yeah. So, when you're right out of school and you know all these things, you cannot wait to share all those things.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to sit back and listen and say, tell me what worked and what didn't work so far. Mm-hmm. Like, wouldn't have that been a great question to be asked?
I mean, if I was asked one question, I would have been thrilled.
Right.
Right. I really would have been thrilled instead of been talked at. But you're right. And, one of the things that I talk about a lot, not just with physicians, but really for all of us, is that, listening is not waiting for our turn to speak.
Right. It's taking in and then moving around that information and seeing how it will fit for the patient.
Right. And it's also not applying all of what one person has gone through to themselves. I found he was telling me about it when he was strength training, when he was working out, and I'm thinking, you're a man, you're in your early 40s,
Right.
You're a doc. We are two different species. And what works for you isn't necessarily going to work for me. So, we need doctors like you. And I think the ones like yourself that have had personal experience really can move the needle and help others. So you received your doctorate from the National College of Chiropractic in Illinois, and you're also a public speaker. So tell me a little bit about that. What has that been like for you? Why did you decide to venture out into the speaking world?
Terrifying and exhilarating and empowering, right? It's all those things. It's praying to God every time, right before I go out, every time, God, please let me speak into their listening. Let me say something that empowers them. Let me say something that's going to move their dial further towards better healthcare, right? But it is such a vulnerable position to put yourself in, to be a public speaker. I am for the first time speaking to my chiropractic convention this November. I was asked to speak, and that in itself is a whole new animal. Like when I speak to people that I know can use my help is one thing. To speak to my peers, totally new level of intimidation right there.
Well, good for you. It's
Thank
wonderful. You. Yeah. And what are the benefits? I love it. I do it myself. I like to speak at medical conferences because I love to educate. I love to learn, but I'm so curious. I love to talk about it. Right.
Yeah, there's so many aha things. So for instance, like we talked about thyroid, what people don't know is that their low thyroid symptoms are 40% of the time, especially in the United States, are from an autoimmune system, an autoimmune reaction to their thyroid, which starts in the gut. And they don't know that. And so we pick that apart and we talk about that. And then we do blood work to back it up. And we find about 40% of the time they have something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which means they have their immune system is attacking their thyroid, but their thyroid is working just fine. But when the immune system attacks it, it causes inflammation in the system and in the thyroid, causing all the same symptoms you would get if you had a low functioning thyroid gland. And so what do we do about that? We decrease the inflammation is what we do. And we do that through diet and supplementation and cleaning up your environment. And it's much simpler than it sounds. And sometimes it's more complicated. And so we look at the environment you're in. If you are working as an artist and working with lead-based paints, we're going to look at that. If you are working in an industrial waste situation where you're exposed to a lot of chemicals, or hazmat cleanup, like UPS. My husband works for UPS and he was in hazmat. And when he was in hazmat, I was not so happy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He was not so happy. I was really actually scared for him because of all the toxins he was exposed to.
Yeah.
And so now he happily just does packaging for them in the hazmat area, but does all the other things in other departments. So, you got to consider what you're exposed to and what environment you're in, plus what food you're eating, what food you even have access to. I talked to someone else who, if I live close to Detroit and there are Detroit and Flint and Trenton, there's areas in my country, in my state that doesn't really have the greatest access to food. And the best food they can find is sometimes, I can't believe I'm saying it, McDonald's.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's tragic. So it's like, what do you have exposed to? What do you have access to? And we want to take all this together and put together a plan that works for you, that's doable. And trust me, if you're eating McDonald's every day, do not think that I'm going to tell you to eat at Whole Foods every day. That is a huge jump. We're not going to do that. We're going to see what better choices we can make along the way to get you there. Yeah. And maybe it won't be there, but it will be higher quality food. It will be better conscientious choices for you and your health based on the goals you want, not the goals I want for you, the goals that you want for yourself.
Yeah, I feel like I'm getting my own personal consultation. And I love that your dog is barking. We love our dogs. Our dogs are good for our health. And mine is laying underneath my table, my desk right now. So I love too that you love yoga, I would assume. Yoga is a big part of your practice. Can you share a little bit about that?
So yoga is not a big part of my practice, but movement is.
Okay.
So yoga is fabulous, but not everyone has the patience to slow down to that extent, right? ADD all over the place, right? We are high functioning. We get a lot done. We're kind of chaotic while we do it, but slowing down is a stretch. And so sometimes it's meditative walking. Sometimes it's listening to a podcast and walking. It's multitasking. It's really hard to go from busy to meditating, but I love it. So if you can get there, the benefits are astounding. And especially, we talked about cholesterol just real quick.
Yeah.
We talked about how cholesterol is high on almost everyone in the United States. There's a few reasons why cholesterol goes up. One, blood sugar imbalance. Pay attention to that. Two, it is stress. When you are stressed, your cholesterol naturally goes up because cholesterol transports your sex hormones and your stress hormones. If you need those hormones to get from one place to another because you're stressed out, cholesterol is going to do it. So you pull your blood, cholesterol is high. It just makes sense. And the other reason is if you have low functioning thyroid, your cholesterol will be up.
Great. Yeah, that was on my blood results that I had high cholesterol. And I was at my mom's last night, and my mother had been sharing about her doctor visit, and she was telling her doctor about how could my daughter have high cholesterol? She gets up and she works out every morning and she meditates and da. And it is very interesting and very important that we learn about what you are discussing today, that we learn more about our body. I can actually physically see now the difference. And so can my husband, because I've pointed it out, that I will wake up very bloated. My face will be very puffy if I eat certain foods.
Yes. Pay attention to that. Yes. 100%.
And I never, I used to laugh at those things. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's never going to happen to me. And then when it did, I'm like, wow. And now to have somebody else to see that as well, it's also important that, just like you said, that we pay attention to those things and we seek out people that are going to listen to us, Dr. Stacey. Right. And not like women. I don't know, like we need more women like you out there to listen, because our bodies are so different. Our hormones are so different. And we need more women like yourself. So I know that we're going to put in the show notes all of the information to find you, to follow you on social. But what would you like to share with the audience? Oh, two things. And maybe you could think about the second one so you can answer the first one. What was the most difficult hurdle for you in terms of going out on your own as a woman in business?
Right.
And then
I didn't know anything about business. Can I just answer that?
Yeah.
Nothing.
So what'd you do? How'd you do it?
So honestly, the best thing to do is get a good accountant. They are the most utilized and supportive, and they know how to do your books. They know how to, not go wrong with the IRS, right? Important things. Once you have a good accountant, then the rest of it comes a little easier. You have to figure out marketing. You have to figure out how to get your name out there. You have to step outside your comfort zone often. So definitely that. Yeah,
I will add to that if you have an accountant, you should also have a financial consultant, because they're very different than accountants. Bookkeepers and accountants aren't the same either. So that is the thing, they don't teach business in medical school and chiropractic school. They teach you how to help us thrive in our health And we should not be upset about that for you, but we should encourage that there is some type of way to learn about business before we go into it. And then what has been the most gratifying for you in your business since you've been practicing so long?
Honestly, it moves me every day when someone feels better after they're with me. I can't even tell you. If anyone out there is interested in going into healthcare or service-based, anything where you're affecting someone's life, it is the most empowering thing ever for yourself, for them. How beautiful is that combination?
Yeah.
And it just lights me up every day. It's why I will never retire unless you like put a gun to my head. Like not even. It's just who I am. And I just love it.
Yeah. Helping others is definitely the most rewarding free service sometimes in the world, just to be kind to somebody, but to be able to do that for a living, and also support yourself financially must be a true gift. Right. So I'm so glad to have met you and to have had you on the show today. I highly encourage everybody to follow Dr. Stacey. We'll have all of the information in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much.
So if you want to party like it's 1999, but run your medical practice like it's 2022, don't forget to check out Riva Global Medical Virtual Assistants.
So don't forget, if you mention that you've seen the show or listened to it on the podcast, mention Thai Technology and you will get 3 months for free.